Hello, Mimi. How are you? Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How are you, Mimi?
Hi.
Just fine.
You. Well, we're glad we're all here, and Cynthia is going to be our person in the control office, and she'll get the film going with no problem. And Christine should be checking in just a second. So
Okay.
all is underway.
Yep, it looks like I'm all set to share the screen. Yep.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yep, all ready to go.
Well, thank you,
Sure.
Cynthia.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
All right, so now Mimi, I'm making you a co-host, so you can now share
Okay.
your screen when the time comes.
All
And I'll
right.
do this, okay. And otherwise, everything has worked well with this operation. And as I told Christine, we asked all the participants if they have any questions to write them in the Q&A feature, and then I will ask them of you at the end of the film, or
Okay.
however you'd like to do it.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and just let me know when you're ready for me to start,
All
and I
right.
will start the video.
We will.
Okay.
Mimi, where are you calling, or where are you checking in from?
I'm in San Francisco.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah,
You
so-
live in the city?
I do. Yeah.
I grew up there.
Okay.
What neighborhood are you from, or are you in?
I'm in North Beach.
Oh, well, lovely. That's a
So-
great place to be,
Yeah.
full of fun and culture. And it's a nice place.
Yeah. I enjoy it. I was in the East Bay for a while, but it was a good decision to move back to San Francisco.
Hi.
Hello,
Christine.
good afternoon, Christine. You're not moving. Are you
Hey,
all right?
Christine.
I still had problem. I didn't realize, never mind.
All
No.
right. We don't want to hear about the problem.
Never mind. Hi, Mimi.
Hello.
Christine, I'm going to make you a co-host now, so you can share your screen or do whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Give us some
just-
makeup
it's-
hands.
I don't think you need to really do anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look directly in the camera, but I'm going to actually be reading from my Word document with the
Thank you.
introduction.
I know
And you
that
know,
feeling. I know
so-
those tricks.
You know, Mimi, you've never seen this picture. You know, I don't know if I think I told you the story after you and I met, and the picture, it really destroyed my family. Remember that whole story?
Yes, you.
Because of this photograph. It's because of this
Yes.
right here.
I came to your home once and you.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
is
I
it.
saw it.
This is the
So,
photograph. Well,
it-
and actually this is a reproduction because the trustee wouldn't even give me the original.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah. He gave it to the photo archive in Washington and in Watertown.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
What is it
that's a
called?
good
Armenian.
place for it, you know.
Yeah, I guess it
it's,
is.
You know, and everything I have is digital. I
Yeah,
don't even
that's
want originals
Yeah,
because
I hear you. I hear what you're saying, but
when
anyway,
I'm gone, then it ends up in the trash.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
which is disturbing.
Right. So anyway, that's the scoop on that.
So I don't think I need to share my screen, right?
I don't
mean,
think you do either, because
Nope.
Cynthia is the one that needs to share the screen.
Okay,
She will have the film.
because I'll be talking, but I'm not
Okay.
showing any documents.
Right. So I'll give an introduction and then I'll introduce you. Then you have, say your 5 minutes.
Well,
And then,
I'll start things and then.
oh
I'll
yeah,
turn it
right.
over to
What I'm
you.
saying, yeah.
So,
When I'm done, then you'll take over and then we'll show the film.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if we run into any issues about someone not being able to speak that wishes of the four of us, please let me know.
Oh, sure.
We don't want to have all of our pictures up on the screen while we're looking at the movie.
No, we don't.
So. all
Yeah.
right. So we have another 10 minutes before we'll be starting. So, but just keep in mind, everyone can hear our conversation. in
Right,
the
yeah,
audience.
I noticed that.
Yes.
Do you want to test it? You want to test the video, or Cynthia, you're all good to go?
She said she was good to go, and I think she's just.
Yeah,
gonna-
I'm all set. I'm all set. I
Alright.
mean,
That's great.
I can test the screen share right now if you
All
guys
right, why
want.
don't you? Go
Sure,
ahead.
let's do it.
All right.
Okay, now Cynthia,
You
how,
see it?
how do I
Yeah.
get rid of this stuff on the side?
You hit the, I just did it. You hit the reduce button up at the top. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to do it, but yeah, that's how I would do it.
But I still see all of your pictures. How do I
Yeah.
get rid of
So
those?
see above my head, there's a short bar, a medium bar, and then 2 bars. Hit the short bar up at the thumbnail. It says hit thumbnail video.
I don't have that on my screen.
Well,
Yeah,
you
it's
may
just-
have view on the top right corner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or view options, yeah.
So
Okay,
hit view.
Hide video panel, hide video panel,
I don't have that.
view, under view options.
Okay, what you
Yeah.
need to do is you could hit standard, but you will also, there's a black bar at the, on the top of the image.
View options, okay.
And then if you hit that smallest line,
You know what?
Yeah,
I
the
think I
small
see-
line, not the medium line. You see a small line, a medium line, and then 2 lines, and then you hit the small one, it reduces it.
No.
Why don't you show your, can you show your screen? Are you
Yeah,
showing your
Yeah,
screen?
I'll figure it out. I'll do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you guys want me to make sure everybody can hear the sound? Do you want me to play this until the sound starts?
That'd be
No, I'm
great.
sure that'll be fine. That's not an issue.
Did you hear that music?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we're all good to go then.
Great, thank you.
so I will share an image with you if you don't mind. I'll just put this.
Oh, yes, yes, my brother, I asked him to buy me some stamps.
I just received this today.
How did you get it?
So it was it's a very complicated connection, but anyway, my niece's grandmother on the other side of her family has a cousin in Yerevan anyway. So she asked this cousin to send them to her in LA, and then she sent me this.
So those are the Diana Apcar commemorative stamps.
Wow.
Diane and Cynthia, yeah,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
that's
um,
exciting.
Yeah, I should, anyway, yeah, so I've been looking for a frame, quite honestly, too.
Nice.
It got me all excited when I opened up my mail.
Oh, that's wonderful. Were you happy with the way they came out?
Actually, not 100% because
Yeah.
I was involved in the discussion
Uh-huh.
around the design, and I liked a different image better, but it looks good. I'm not, I'm just being very fussy because there were 3 original concepts, and they chose the one that wasn't my favorite.
You least liked, yeah. Well, after all, it is your Ms. Mama, so
Yeah,
it's important to you. So, but that's exciting,
but it is, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really great.
right? So Diane, if you want, after this, I can send you and Cynthia, if you both like, a copy of my my uncle's autobiography.
Oh,
It's not
yes.
long, it's very short, it's very elementary. He wasn't a, fabulous
nice.
writer, but he got a lot of good stuff down.
Wonderful. That would be
Yeah.
helpful for discussion section. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. You can see little typo marks my father made. He corrected my typing. This is
Oh.
back when we had typewriters.
Oh, wow. You're going to date yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
I'm no young chicken anymore, that's for sure.
Join the hen house. So Mimi, you've been giving a number of these presentations with your film recently. Where else have you been?
Well, the first one I gave was at Columbia, which was very nice. This was actually pre-COVID. And I did one at Fresno State. And let me think, where else? I was in Boston, and that was a community presentation. And let's see, virtually, I did a screening as part of a fundraiser for Artsakh, which is the territory in Azerbaijan that's was attacked just in September, October of this year. And over 40,000 people are displaced, and their territory has reduced dramatically. And anyway, so I did a fundraiser to help displaced persons
Wonderful.
in Artsakh. So that went well. And what else? Originally, I started screening at a few film festivals, but there aren't that many film festivals interested in historical Armenian women.
Well,
So, yeah, just, and but it did show at well, let's see, there was I screened it in Armenia at the Golden Apricot Film Festival. It screened in LA. There's also an Armenian film festival there. I was accepted by one American film festival outside of Philadelphia, the New Hope Film Festival.
great.
So it screened there. And when it's screened, people like it. You know, I've received 3 awards. So yeah, when it screens, it actually has a pretty good response, audience response.
Excellent.
So anyway, I wish I knew more about distribution, et cetera. I would like to have it available on one of the main streaming platforms, but I haven't been able to coordinate that so far.
Well, we have a connection to the Sebastopol film festivals, so maybe we'll get you connected there.
Maybe we should put Mimi in contact with Professor Berenbaum.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would be great,
He has a
Diane.
lot of connections in the film industry.
Yeah, that's great. If you could forge that relationship, that would be fabulous of
Okay.
you.
I'm sure he'd be interested in seeing this.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can get underway. What time does everyone have?
It's, I have 4:58.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. So do you have any others coming up right up after this, Mimi, or
No, nothing scheduled.
right now? Well, things will pick
So-
up after, once everybody's inoculated and we can get out to theaters again, and maybe it'll be screened in some houses in some of our major cities. That would be great.
That would be great. Yeah, I don't know how likely that is, but it's actually virtual screenings are pretty good.
Oh, yes.
You know,
Yes.
they can be quite effective. I did screen virtually through, there's a Holocaust and Human Rights Center in New Jersey, Change. Are you familiar with them?
Yes, yes, I have heard of them.
So they screened it, and there were 1,500 people who signed up.
Amazing. Well,
That
that's
was
really
amazing.
a great audience. No, I mean, you get people who are truly interested and they come and it's available to them more easily than other venues. So that works very well. Well, good evening, everyone, and we welcome you again to the Holocaust and Genocide Lecture Series. This evening, we're very pleased to be able to present the film, The Stateless Diplomat, the story of Diana Apkar. And we have here the filmmaker, Mimi Malayan, and our good friend, Christine Davidian, will introduce Mimi and tell us a little bit about a personal anecdote from her family history that fits very well with this film. So welcome both of you. And an additional note, we wish Professor Boaz a very happy birthday, but we won't sing.
Happy birthday.
That's fine. Thank you.
All right, take it away, Christine.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Diane. And it is my honor today to introduce Mimi Malayan. Mimi has practiced landscape architecture in San Francisco Bay Area for 20 years, focusing her professional career on urban parks, plazas, and playground design. Although retired, she continues to teach at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. In 2002, Mimi discovered a box of papers by her great-grandmother, Diana Apkar, in her uncle's apartment. This was the seed to uncovering her great-grandmother's life story. A decade later, Mimi started researching Diana's life and accomplishments. The result is The Stateless Diplomat. On a personal note, my uncle Archie, or Hachig in Armenian, was rescued by Diana after the Armenian Genocide. Surviving the genocide as a teenager, my uncle traveled all the way from the Caucasus to Vladivostok and then rescued by Diana, who was living in Yokohama, Japan. His story of survival to Japan was the only one I had ever heard growing up on the East Coast until I met Mimi about 7 years ago when she coincidentally was presenting a story of Diana at a West Coast conference. Mimi explained that most of the Armenians Diana rescued ended up in Angel Island in San Francisco Bay, but my uncle was one of the few Diana sent back to the Middle East. My uncle eventually came to live with my grandfather and my father in Worcester, Massachusetts. So I am grateful to Mimi for sharing my uncle's autobiography on the Stateless Diplomat website, to Sonoma State for sharing, or showing this special film, and that I could dedicate my an Armenian Genocide Memorial brick in the SSU Holocaust and Genocide Memorial Grove to honor my uncle who traveled around the world overcoming adversity. So welcome, Mimi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christine. I'd like to express my deepest thanks to Christine Davidian, Diane Parnassus, Cynthia, who's behind the controls, and everyone at Sonoma State involved in coordinating and promoting this event. I'm very happy to share my film with you today, and I'm very grateful. So thank you. This film project has been a labor of love for me that took 8 years to complete. Growing up, I heard stories about Diana Apkar, Granny, as my mother used to say, but I had no idea of the scope of her accomplishments, nor the impact of her work for Armenia and the Armenian people until I began to research her. The more I investigated, the more awestruck I became, and quickly realized that I needed to share her story with as many people as possible. Film seemed to be the most effective way to accomplish that goal. In 1917, Japan did not have a refugee policy, but due to Diana's guarantees and the trust and respect that Japanese officials held for her, Armenian genocide survivors were provided access to Japan. In other words, the outcome for these refugees would have been completely different without Diana. Not having passports or proper travel documents, they would not have reached Japan and would have remained in Russia or China, not accomplishing their ultimate goal of reaching the United States. Once in Japan, using her own resources, Diana rented houses to shelter the refugees, found them jobs, and sent their children to school. She helped with visas and ship passage and located relatives in the United States to enable the last leg of their journey. I should also point out that Diana's work, namely helping waves of desperate refugees, started several years before her diplomatic appointment and continued for years after the dissolution of the independent Armenian Republic. In fact, Diana's life work was in service to her nation and its people, while her position as honorary consul barely lasted 6 months. An author, businesswoman, activist, humanitarian, and diplomat, Diana single-handedly rescued thousands of genocide survivors who started life anew in a distant land. Most of these innumerable accomplishments took place before American women even had the right to vote. The film, The Stateless Diplomat, tries to convey the pivotal moments in Diana's life: her awakening to the Armenian cause, her spiritual vision prompting her into activism, her mental collapse and frustration as she foresaw the genocide, and her endless humanitarian work, personally aiding thousands of genocide survivors. Diana's accomplishments exceed all reasonable expectations for one lifetime. And yet she did this as a single woman in a far-off land over 100 years ago. Thank you for watching The Stateless Diplomat. I look forward to your questions after the film. So Cynthia, take it away.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start it, and then I'm gonna mute myself. So if for some reason you guys can't hear it when I mute myself, just let me know. Hold on, sorry about that.
We had recently moved from India to Japan when I was giving birth to our son. My husband was nowhere to be found. Downstairs, creditors arrived to repossess nearly everything we owned. I never felt so helpless, so alone in the world, like a refugee in a foreign land. I had the thought of hiding pieces of my jewelry and gave them to my neighbor. I felt shame and embarrassment, but I needed to protect my family. Only God would know how these small trinkets would aid us in the future. Then Michael was born, and the pain and the shame evaporated. I felt the joy of holding my first son in my arms.
Little did Diana know that 25 years into the future, she would help hundreds of refugees and be known as the Little Mother of a Nation. An Armenian woman living in Japan, Diana Aghabeg Apkar had never laid eyes on her homeland. But events taking place there, halfway around the world, would transform her life and purpose. Under the cover of World War I, the Ottoman Turks launched a genocide against the Armenian people. Their homeland stolen, 1.5 million Armenians died. Very few escaped, and those who did were desperate for help. The writings of a modest widow were inspiration to millions of Armenians, pawns in the game of empires vying for power. Championing the cause of her countrymen, Diana Apgar was among the first women to take on a modern diplomatic role.
Diana was ahead of her time. Her main concern was to find some refuge for these peoples, and she did this single-handedly.
She tried to do her utmost for a cause in which she believed, that is, the survival of the Armenians, the survival of the Armenian state.
She was a great humanitarian.
She was a woman in a man's world, and she was making things happen.
We tend to forget the power of the individual. The power of the individual is a remarkable phenomenon.
She was a radical. She was very critical of the world powers.
Diana Aghabeg was the youngest of 7 children. Her parents were Armenian immigrants from Iran who ran a large dairy farm in Rangoon.
In modern times, of course, India has had a special place in the history of Armenian diaspora. It has been a major center for Armenian intellectuals and, of course, very well-known people who were major entrepreneurs and businessmen in India.
It was crucial to Armenians in the diaspora, especially in very foreign environments, to create tight-knit communities wherein they would keep all of their traditions and maintain all of the societal norms that would have been in place in their homeland. The grounding factor in a person's life was their ability to stay true to their roots. Being a member of the Armenian Apostolic Church at that time meant, especially in the diaspora, that the church was the center of your life. This would have certainly meant that she was a devout Armenian Apostolic Christian.
My mother always said that I was a queer child, that I was precociously thoughtful and exquisitely sensitive. She thought of me as a different kind of Christian too, rejecting certain church dogmas. But she knew I had clearly defined principles that were impossible to circumvent.
Diana attended convent school in Calcutta. Growing up speaking English, she sought out Armenian lessons as a teen. She loved reading and writing and wrote her first novel as a young woman. When Diana met Armenian businessman Michael Apgar, she was more interested in writing than his courtship. She was almost 30 when they finally married. They honeymooned in Japan. A year later, Diana, Michael, and their daughter Rose moved from India to Japan, where Michael established his import-export business.
Before the Meiji era, Japan had been closed to foreigners for more than 200 years. For modernizing Japan, they had this policy which was called Oyatoi Gaikokujin. It's in Japanese, which means honorary hiring foreigners. Foreigners were treated with great respect because most of the foreigners in Japan, both men and women, were there to educate Japanese about modern Western life.
A foreign trade was just starting up, in the 1880s, and there was a lot of demand. I will say the business was very profitable and prosperous. He was a very hot-tempered man. He lost his temper very frequently, and he was a terrible spendthrift. He would spend on anything that suited his fancy, and I think that it was very hard on Diana. I think the whole thing was very difficult for her, especially as she had lost 2 children, both of meningitis. Yes, that's a difficult life. I don't think it was a happy marriage. I really don't.
Diana and Michael had 5 children. 2 of their 3 sons died. In 1904, Japan went to war with Russia. As the wounded and dead began to return to Japan, Diana published her book, Home Stories of the War, 8 short stories about common Japanese people whose loved ones fought in the Russo-Japanese War. She dedicated the book to the Japanese people.
In that book, there are many stories, like when the Japanese mother or father, when they lose their son, they are saying that it's the highest honor for a man to die for his country.
These fictional stories are based on what Diana could see around her.
The little boy heard his grandfather and other people talking. They said curious things of how those who had gone into the war were now put in the big shrine to be honored forever. He knew his father had gone to the war, and he was always waiting for his father to come back. He is now in such a big house that we cannot find him anymore.
I can share Diana's impressions on that time about Japanese, about patriotism, first of all, devotion to communities, devotion to homeland, and about readiness to sacrifice.
The main message of Home Stories of the War is the ability of Japanese people to accept the pain and the loss without complaining.
Diana's stoicism intensified when her husband Michael died suddenly while on a business trip. A frightened horse kicked him in the head in a freak accident. He died 2 days later.
When Diana's husband died, Diana was very young. So Diana suddenly had this responsibility of taking care of 3 children and to support the family. She didn't give up. She just learned about the business. She did her best to make it successful for supporting the family.
In April 1909, Armenian Christians were massacred by Ottoman Muslims in the city of Adana. This expanded into a series of anti-Armenian pogroms throughout the province.
The Adana massacre is really a terrible moment. In 1908, the revolution in which Armenians and Jews and Muslims and Arabs had all participated and really felt like it was a moment of constitutionalism and renewed brotherhood and so on, was met with a counter-revolution of religious conservatives and Turkic nationalists. And one of the focal points for that was Adana, a town in south-central Anatolia, where local religious extremists and religious students attacked the local Armenian community, burning and destroying entire towns and villages.
Diana held regular gatherings in her home with religious, university, and diplomatic leaders to discuss the world's current events.
Are you feeling well, Reverend?
I have some bad news. A party of Armenian pastors on their way to the American Missionary Conference in Adana were stopped on the road and butchered.
Oh no. Are the killings starting again? God help us. Why aren't the newspapers recounting the story of the slain ministers? Michael, go get the evening edition. We need to know what's going on. How can this be happening? What can be done to stop this violence?
I just got these. The American papers have the story.
The immediate aftermath of the Adana massacres in 1909, Diana Afkar prepared a pamphlet to be distributed in the United States that told the story of the horrors of the massacres in Adana and the nearby provinces, eventually these pamphlets were expanded and they were published in Japan in 1910.
I have met an American missionary passing through Japan. He had been in Silesia during the Adana massacres, and I have been struck with horror at what he had related. And as for the number precipitated into homelessness and destitution, he said, who can tell? They plundered and plundered and plundered and burned what they could not plunder. In Kasab, there was not even a water jug left.
At least 30,000 were killed in the Adana massacres, but there was also a great deal of displacement. And the displacement was really the important issue. You had large numbers of refugees flooding into the city from the countryside, but you had the destruction of the entire Armenian agricultural infrastructure, which created starvation and disease for the next several years.
Diana had always followed world events, but Adana was a turning point for her.
The Armenians may be led again as sheep to the slaughter, and the work of extermination may be completed.
Europeans had long debated the Armenian question, how to protect a group of fellow Christians who were surrounded by Muslim neighbors. But debates did not prevent the massacres.
There was a consciousness among educated or relatively educated people at that time, you know, of the existence of the Armenian question, of the plight of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, and so on. I would tend to think that she was part of that broader mood, you know, among Armenians, the realization that the bulk of the Armenian nation is endangered, is being massacred, that essentially nobody cares. The great powers are playing games among themselves.
Diana wrote feverishly that year, publishing 2 books in 1910, The Truth About the Armenian Massacres and Betrayed Armenia.
Other Christian nations under Turkish rule have been emancipated and their martyrdoms have come to an end. But the Armenians have been left to murder, woe, and desolation to this day. The powers of Europe have placed a far greater value upon the Turkish railroad concessions and spheres of influence in the Turkish Empire than upon the blood of a helpless Christian race.
Diana's books were well received, but to no avail. She felt disappointed and ineffectual. How could she influence world attention toward Armenia? Was this expectation even realistic? When the ways of men proved difficult, Diana increasingly turned to God for guidance.
She would go in that tower room every morning at about 10 o'clock, and that was her time of day that you just didn't disturb her.
Close
And that's
the door.
when she would sing her hymns and
Sing prayers, and nobody should open that door.
As I considered the exceeding great affliction of my people, in the travail of my soul I cried unto the Lord. My people have been consumed with fire and sword, and their blood did run down as many rivers. My people have eaten ashes as bread, and quenched their thirst with tears. And as I prayed, there stood beside me, as in a vision, he, the strength of whose presence penetrated into the marrow of my bones. He led me by the hand into a valley, and there lay ashes of human flesh and charred bones of the dead. I fell on my face with fear and trembling, but he lifted me and said, "Write what these people shall speak unto thee." And I said, "Sir, what shall I write? The dead speak not." And he said, "Nay, I shall make them stand up in the living flesh, and I shall give them a tongue." Once more he spake, "Write what the slain of thy people shall speak. My strength is sufficient for thee."
Every human has been created with a purpose. One of the struggles that Christians face throughout their lives and in their relationship with God is determining exactly what that purpose or those purposes are. Throughout the annals of Christian history, we meet many remarkable people who have had and been guided by visions.
The sense of calling, that what she's doing has to do with God, what God wants her to do. But it's a little more than that, because it's also like, you're the one that God wants you to do this.
Armenians are an ancient people. Theirs is one of the world's oldest cultures. Throughout history, the Armenian homeland had been free at times and absorbed by neighboring powers at others. The Armenians were the first nation to adopt Christianity. But since the rise of Islam, they have been surrounded by Muslim peoples.
Diana's interest in politics had sprung from the intolerance of injustice. She couldn't tolerate the injustice of bigger countries towards smaller countries.
In 1300, the Ottoman Empire began an expansive conquest across the Middle East, Northern Africa, and Southern Europe. The Armenian homeland was among the first nations to be absorbed.
She could read the political landscape well and foresee the danger of her nation. It was this understanding of the situation that motivated her to try to protect Armenia with her pen by convincing the world of her country's situation.
The great powers of Europe treat the small nations as billiard players treat the balls on a billiard table. They strike the helpless balls of the small nations with their political cues, and the balls have to go rolling here and there at the stroke of the players. I am a peace worker because there has been war in my country for centuries, because I belong to a nation martyred by the imperialism of other nations. Every nation has a right to its own separate existence. Every nation has an inalienable right to that country which is its own inheritance.
In the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was losing its power. Greece and the Balkan countries fought and won back their independence. Armenia as a country had not existed for hundreds of years, and the Armenian people, bound by a language, church, and culture, were spread across hundreds of miles. The lands they inhabited had long before been swallowed up by the empires that surrounded them. 6 Armenian vilayets, or provinces, were part of the Ottoman Empire, 2 others part of the Russian Empire, and thousands of other Armenians were scattered throughout neighboring areas.
The Armenians, they were stateless. They had no one really to protect their interests.
Hemmed round by 3 great empires, Russian, Turkish, and Persian, the unfortunate geographical position of our country became the cause of its people's ruin. We were told in the polite language of diplomacy that the equilibrium of Europe and the peace of Europe required that Armenia should remain under Turkish domination. The power and sovereignty of the Turk are kept up by the powers of Europe.
So the Ottoman Empire went from a place where the Armenians were part of the warp and weft of culture and society and economics to a place where they became a feared and hated minority over the course of about a century.
The assumption of many Armenians is that somehow imperial powers had to help.
Public opinion in Great Britain was very pro-Armenian. There were pro-Armenian societies and parliamentary debates in which the Armenian issue would come up again and again. And Great Britain, would often criticize the Ottoman Empire, and Armenians took this as support.
It would be good to think about 19th century Armenian history from a realistic perspective of international relations.
For their foolishness in trusting in European protection and hoping for European intervention, the unfortunate Armenians paid with rivers of their own blood. And for their crime of failure, they were made to wallow in that blood.
As her writings traveled the globe, Diana received considerable praise for her work.
Other women just simply didn't do these sort of things. And surprisingly enough, all of the people that she was involved with, the diplomats, the university academics, they all respected her very much.
Մենք գիտենք, որ այն ժամանակ հաղորդակցությունը տարբեր երկրների միջև չափազանց դժվար էր, սակայն նրա համար կարծես այդ արգելքները չկային, կարծես նա մի տեսակ համացանց ունենար, որով կարողանար նա ցնական կապերի մեջ մտնել աշխարհի մեծերի եւ հեղինակությունների հետ, նրանց ստիպել տալով խոսել հայ ժողովրդի մասին եւ ճանաչել տալ հայդարը.
I really do not care at all about myself individually, but I do care that the truth should be known. Our appeal was received at The Hague on December 5th. Robbers are always fighting over the division of stolen goods, and this is called war. The government has organized a system of outrage for race extermination.
As to how many letters she has written, God knows, because apparently she has been writing letters right and left to all kinds of people, from missionaries to ministers to politicians to presidents to kings, humanitarian institutions, Red Cross, plain individuals whom she thought could be of some assistance.
Diana Abkar has more than 15 years correspondence with David Starr Jordan. He was a leading educator and peace activist and was the founding president of Stanford University.
I am very much interested in what you say in regard to affairs in Armenia.
The Turkish government is determined to finish the Armenians.
I've just about made up my mind to go to Armenia. I'm sending your letter to President Wilson. Diana's urgent correspondence continued as international tensions snowballed, and the drumbeat to war grew louder. An enormous crowd collected outside the palace. When they heard that war had been declared, the excitement increased. The cheering was terrific. World War I would become the deadliest conflict the world had seen, with more than 40 million military and civilian casualties. The war brought an end to 4 great empires and the rise of several nation-states.
I am writing out as many of the circulars as I can.
There's no salvation for anybody in war.
The great dragon imperialism must be killed before the nations of the earth can be left to live in peace.
Democracy is a form of government fitted for minding one's own business.
To appoint a commission of investigation.
We cannot do anything.
Bring these lurid facts to light.
Absolutely no way.
Armenians are being dispossessed of their homes and lands. The Turkish government is at present preparing another Armenian massacre.
David Starr Jordan introduced her to many peacemakers and many politicians that Diana should contact.
His Excellency Mr. Kosai
Dear
Inawi,
Sir,
my dear Mr. Edmonds, dear Professor Munsterberg, Baroness von Sutter, dear Monsieur Golay, required that Armenia should remain under Turkish domination. I am asking a special favor for these poor Armenians. Yours very gratefully and cordially, Diana Achabeg Apkar.
No!
She's burning her books. Are you all right? She works too much. She needs to rest.
My faith has trembled. I have had a nervous breakdown and could not write after that. I hope to begin my work again after a little rest. Anyhow, all my losses go into God's treasury. Let only Armenia be delivered from the Turkish hell.
Under the cover of war, the young Turks could contemplate final solutions. During peacetime, they would have faced too much outside pressure, but during wartime, other options were available to them. So the genocide itself is really the culmination of a series of causes that have to do with property, that have to do with demography, that have to do with new ideologies of race and nation that grip the Ottoman Empire. Well, genocide often happens during war and revolution. The Ottoman Empire was at war and it just had a revolution.
When the Turkish authorities gave the orders for these deportations, they were merely giving the death warrant to a whole race. They understood this well.
When I asked my father how it was over there, he would just go berserk. You don't know, Cheskeder, Cheskeder, Cheskeder. That's what he would say. You don't know.
In a way, at the heart of this whole genocide experience is, you know, it's being eliminated by the people you are closest to.
My two uncles were arrested in Mezideh in July of 1915. They were tossed in with all the males who were draft age to be conscripted, but of course they were all going to be taken out of town and shot or murdered in one way or another. And my Aunt Yelsa was able to get hold of some money and go and bribe one of the guards in the prison to release the two kids. One was about 12 and one was 9.
Survivors of the genocide bore testimony to its horrors and the daring of their escapes. Among them was Krikor Yehoyan.
I'm going to read the memoirs of my great-grandfather Krikor's experiences. The deportation of my village Quilu did not take them too far.
They were slaughtered and butchered on the slopes of Doros Mountains. Even kids were taught how to kill a man.
I would imagine that Krikor he probably felt this was it. And, you know, he was either going to die here or die trying to escape.
Toward morning, I fixed a place under the floor, a subterranean hole, halfway beneath the floor in the earth. 7 weeks went by. Life became unbearable in that hole. I could not eat or drink. I was more dead than alive. I decided life was not worth living this way. I had reconciled to the idea of death. Now, nothing and nobody seemed that important to me to induce me otherwise.
Yeah, they're just trying to figure out how to survive day to day. So they had heard that there was some Kurds who had a barn and they were allowing the Armenians to live in there. So they went to that barn and they lived. But you know, the thing about Armenians, right, they're very creative people and they get bored real easy if they're not doing something.
When reading Yevoyan's memoir, it was particularly poignant for me to see a similar reference to Armenians building irrigation systems in Kurdish villages even after the genocide. Here's that section. We built fountains, lakes, even waterfalls. Very powerful because it really demonstrates how the narrative of the Armenian who was a builder in the Ottoman Empire continued on even after the attempt to exterminate the Armenians and empty historic Armenia of its inhabitants.
As news of the genocide spread, Diana's long-held anxieties for her fellow Armenians were realized. Her determination to help them only increased.
Have you forgotten poor Armenia? The Turkish government has driven out from all of the towns and villages in Turkish Armenia and Asia Minor 1.5 million Armenians. Our poor people are driven out of their homes without food and clothing into the Arabian Syrian deserts, a march of months. They get an hour's notice and they have to set off at once. They must march and march. Sick, aged children, women are falling on the roadsides and dying.
Soon, it wasn't safe to hide in the Kurdish village anymore. We started on our way. Bandits robbed us. The terrain was almost insurmountable barefoot. We climbed a snow-covered mountain and watched Erzinga bathing in the floodlights of electricity. Erzinga belonged to Russia. I began to work. Everything went well for a while, until Bolshevism broke out and the military was on the move.
They had to go through all kinds of very high and treacherous, dangerous mountain passes to get to Erzurum, where they met, of course, the Russians, who were friendly, and from then on, they thought they were safe.
On the way, I found Leon Sulajan sitting with a little woman on the roadside on the snow. I approached him and said, "Are you crazy? Sitting down like that, you will freeze to death." "Oh, well," he said, "I cannot walk anymore, and I have no more desire left to live." "Get up," I said, "and mount my horse," which he did. And then we put the little woman on the horse and felt happy knowing we saved 2 lives.
As an Armenian, in every almost family we have stories about genocide and about what we called it pach, which means run away or run kind of thing.
Armenians were spread between the Ottoman, Russian, and Persian empires. The Ottoman authorities orchestrated a plan to destroy all the Armenians in their territory through massacre, deportation, and starvation, writing the textbook for modern genocide in the process. Those who could escape went in all directions, south through the desert to Syria, and eventually to modern-day Lebanon. Some made it to Europe, while others went north into Russian territory, and then east, the beginning of a journey that would take them all the way to the Pacific.
It is important to put these pieces together, to have an understanding of the scattering of the Armenian nation following the Armenian genocide.
There's no pattern to survival. It was very random. Sometimes it was just being in the right place at the right time allowed you to survive.
And in Japan, Diana Apgar's work was about to take a new direction. The Japanese officials didn't know what to make of the first Armenian refugees to arrive on their shores. And the Armenians were just as bewildered. Diana returned to her writing, but she could not be sure her words were having any impact.
The irreparable loss, the anguish that will never cease. To murder more than 1 million Armenians, non-combatants. You are looking for my husband to translate something for you? Perhaps I can help. This letter is in Armenian. These people need assistance. Please take me to them. All of my years of endless writing, books, articles, letters, has it changed anything? Barev says. Duk aparov zekerumek. Yes, keprekem says.
Talking about their feelings arriving in Japan, I can understand that they felt probably like on another planet, completely different culture. And they came here just for transit, not to stay.
All these people came with their horror stories of what they had gone through, how much they have lost. And of course, they had nowhere to go, no hope, no chance of picking up the pieces of their life.
And it is remarkable what people survive. I mean, it is just amazing to me. You know, you read these accounts and they're sort of very straightforward. And so you're just sort of reading along, and then I did this, and then I did that. And then you want to say, and you did that, and you did that.
Traveling was hard, and some were able to move faster than others. Working their way east, the refugees, like Krikor, scraped by however they could.
They would work for anything. My father built a bed for some, I don't know whether it was a Bolshevik or a Menshevik, but he was an officer in the Red Army or the White Army, I don't know which. And my father knew nothing about carpentry. And the story goes is when the guy got in the bed, it collapsed.
In those days, 1917, Tsar Nicholas was overthrown. Bolshevism broke out and the military was on the move. The Turks were getting organized for another attack. I made it my business to free myself from this chaos, from this hell. The fields were scorched and bone dry. The little towns and villages were deserted and lay in ruins. Made fire in an empty house. This beautiful home afforded so much happiness to an Armenian family once. Now it stood silently mourning the fate of its one-time occupants. We visited many places. No open market, no bread, only thousands of people wandering aimlessly like the waves of the sea that hit and retreat from the shore with ever-widening ripples. Yes, war is a cruel game. The only purpose it serves is to bring out the latent beastly nature in human beings. My eyes rested on Mount Ararat. How wonderful. For a moment, my beleaguered past was forgotten. Poor old man Ararat. I do not envy you. You have seen brothers rise and kill each other. You must have shed an awful lot of tears over them. Enough for another destructive flood.
Back in Yokohama, groups of Armenian refugees continued to trickle in, seeking a way to reach America. Diana thought she was now prepared to help them.
I do know that you have to have papers to be able to travel. And I don't know, none of these people had passports. Probably a lot of them didn't even have identification. Now, what do you do with people like that? They have to have papers. They have to have families in the United States or Canada or South America vouch for them and say they'll take care of them when they come. All of this, is required. And no country is going to just open the door and say, come on in, you have to have papers. And she had to do all of that paperwork.
Further complicating things, many passenger ships were overbooked or had been called to wartime service. Days turned to weeks, and many Armenian refugees would spend months in Japan before being able to cross the Pacific.
While I was giving birth to you, almost all our belongings were repossessed, but I was able to save this jewelry. I remember it as though it were yesterday. Now is the time to sell it and put the money to good use helping these people. While they were being slaughtered, I was wasting paper, writing endlessly. All those letters and books, has it saved anyone? Now is my chance.
She rented houses around her own house to provide shelter to these people, find them jobs, to make ends meet until as when you are an asylum refugee, you go through a country, you have to stay there for about 3 months until your visa is processed, and then you have access to this country. So that was, I guess, the situation, probably even worse and even more fluid for them because, again, all of these mechanisms that we take for granted today did not exist back then.
それからあとはやはり学校でしょ。近くにはセントジョセフとかって学校が就学させていたかですね。かなり授業料も高かったかもしれませんし、それはわからないですけどね。
You don't do it for glory. You don't do it to get into heaven per se. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And your job is to do good works.
While the bulk of the Armenian genocide took place in 1915 in Anatolia, the violence continued in waves over many years. The earliest refugees to arrive in Japan were only the first in a small but steady stream of Armenians fleeing their homeland. Some, like Krikor Yagoyan, realized their best chance of survival would be to continue north into Russia.
We got on board the ship in Astrakhan, and from there we went straight to Samara. That sounded like a good plan, I thought. We let down a pail and got some water. It was sweet water. It was spring, the snow was melting and feeding and swelling the river Volga. Our steamliner sailed up the river for 5 days and 5 nights. Eventually we got into Samara harbor. We jumped out any way we could, piled up our meager belongings, and waited for dawn. Dawn came. So did confusion and dilemma. We got caught again between two fighting factions. Bullets rained all around. Bullets and bombs ignited the oil tanks, causing a widespread conflagration that engulfed a large part of the city.
I know for a fact my parents and grandparents went from Samara, where they finally got to, but they were detained there by the Bolsheviks for over a year's time, just in Samara. And it drove my father crazy.
Russia was consumed by its own revolution. After overthrowing the Tsar and beginning to consolidate their power, the Red and White armies raged in battles in the streets.
I think my grandfather, Anushavan, decided that they needed to move quickly and that the best and safest route would be across the railway through Russia rather than to try to brave going through the Western Front during World War I when Germany and Russia were fighting.
My father had been on the move basically for several years. He wasn't staying in any one place. We found this picture of my father in a kimono, full dress kimono. So to me, this was evidence that he had been in Japan.
The refugees had come thousands of miles. Those who had passports bore the evidence of the long and dangerous journey, which had yet to reach its conclusion. If they could make it to Japan, there was help.
Diana Apkar helped refugees with logistics, food, place to stay. Diana Apkar actually loaned 40 yen to my grandfather, and he relates in his memoir that when he got to San Francisco, he sent back $25 to repay that loan.
The houses on the top of the hill were quite nice, but the ones down below were little Japanese houses, you know, and that's where she kept the refugees.
They are desperate to go home, but cannot. They have no homeland, and so they go in search of a new one.
In small groups or families traveling together, refugees set sail on one more journey, a new life in a new country. They wouldn't forget what they'd been through. They'd been forever changed by it.
How do you deal with these memories? You know, the memory is of suffering. The memory is of these awful things that were done that basically rendered you powerless. And the struggle becomes around, I think, the feelings of powerlessness and harm that was done to you. And how do you, I don't think you ever get over that, but how do you live through that to something else?
All through the turmoil of the revolution, the great iron way that traverses Russia from Vladivostok to Petrograd, 6,000 miles, was kept going.
We too, including refugees from all parts of the world, got into wagons. Those railroad cars were like houses. The only discomfort we suffered was our tea, which kept spilling over us. It took us 6 months to travel this way. And like an endless caravan, we were meandering our way towards Siberia.
Traveling all the way across Russia. We're not talking about, you know, a couple 100 miles. We're talking about thousands of miles. And, you know, my father is somebody who probably had no experience outside of Turkey growing up. And I don't even know what kind of traveling within Turkey they did as a family. And he's a teenager that, you know, he was able to do this, having lost his whole family.
They would move and they would work and make some money, and then they would be able to afford to travel again. And they just, because he had people with him that had a lot of skills. You know, he was a carpenter. You know, the other guy was probably good as a metallurgist or a blacksmith. So, you know, they would go to a place, they'd work, make some money, and they'd just keep on moving.
For refugees traveling east by train, the end of the road was the Russian city of Vladivostok. In July 1917, the American Red Cross opened its branch there to help the thousands of refugees fleeing the fighting and violence of World War I. Here, Armenians found company among Russians and numerous other refugees from neighboring states. The Red Cross could hold out a timely flame of hope to the bewildered, suffering millions that poured through the Russian steppes. It became harder and harder for Armenians to reach America on their own. Diana worked diligently to find sponsors in America, identification documents, and ship passage for the Armenians stranded at Vladivostok.
For ship passage to San Francisco, the rates are as follows. Third class, 102 yen. Second class, 200 yen. Dear Sir, you will do a very great kindness indeed to the Armenian refugees if you will kindly demand from the Armenian Committee the passports which they supply to refugees. Excellent, Sir. I am appealing to you on behalf of those of my nationals who arrive here via Siberia with the intention and purpose of proceeding to the United States. I know for a fact that every one of these is as loyal to the United States as the most loyal American. Indeed, an oppressed and hunted people couldn't be anything else but loyal to the country that is kind to them.
This is a letter that we found, my family found, that had been in my father's possession, and it's dated April 28th, 1919, in Vladivostok, Siberia. To whom it may concern, Mr. Keshkegyan escaped from the Turkish massacres in his own country, made his way across Russia to Vladivostok, and has been in our barracks for about 7 months. Mr. Keshkegyan expects to leave here in a few days for the United States. His conduct while in the barracks leads us to believe that he will make a desirable citizen. And it's signed T.J. Edmonds, Director of Civil Affairs, Eastern Siberia, the American Red Cross.
Here, Diana played a critical role. She drew on her experience as a businesswoman to raise money for the refugees' expenses. And using her understanding of the Japanese government, Diana convinced officials to grant the refugees temporary asylum on their way to America.
I pray that Your Excellency will be graciously pleased to instruct the Japanese Consul General at Vladivostok to give them and their families permission to come to Japan. I hereby guarantee that if Liparit Hambarazumian and his wife Elizabeth need pecuniary assistance, or if the Japanese authorities consider that they so need, I will assist them. If they cause any loss to other people, I will be their surety. When Japanese authorities consider it necessary for them to leave the country, their expenses will be incurred by me. Depreciation of the ruble has reduced the money some of these refugees have to such a ridiculous sum that they are not able to pay their own way. 16,320 yen will be the expense of 68 passages. That is 4,320 yen short. But if the Armenian Committee is going to pay, then we will be able to send 50 by the Yokohama Maru, leaving May 30th.
More Armenians found their way to Siberia and then on to Japan, where the intersection of cultures made for interesting juxtapositions. While Diana's name alone was a lifeline for Armenians who had managed to reach Japan, obstacles dogged her efforts to find the refugees a new home.
In Tsuruga and Yokohama, there will be no trouble if they mention my name to the authorities because the Japanese government has given me permission. A very difficult trouble is to find passage on these ships from March till October. The ships are full and the shipping company's quite independent. The accommodation on these OSK boats is very miserable. The US government has ordained very strict regulations against alien immigration. The recent fire in Yokohama has been a trouble because Miuraya's hotel was burnt down, and I have had a hard time searching for accommodation for the refugees. There are now about 60 or more Armenian refugees on the premises we were able to rent, besides 5 Assyrians, and also I took in 3 Greeks. So there is no room for the second Armenian party.
We learn about the love and attention you have shown toward your unfortunate compatriots, and of how you facilitate their stay in that distant land. I appreciate you and wish God to strengthen you in your activities, with love and consolation for our sisters and brothers of our multi-tortured nation.
The little mother of a nation, that was her nickname given by many Armenian refugees who came down. There is this woman in Yokohama who can help you.
ダイアンさんに関しましては、朝日新聞に、女万随院長兵衛いうふうに、例えられて出ていました。万随院長兵衛というのは江戸時代の、お侍さんというか お役人ですね。だからこそ万随院長兵衛の話が日本人の中に伝わってるんですが、その万随院長兵衛がですね、結局弱者の味方であったわけです。弱い者に対して、こんな仕事やっても俺の何の得にもなんない、この役人として上上がっていくための何の役にも立たない、見過ごしていってもいいというような人が多い中で、長兵衛はやはり弱ってる人がいたらどんな人でも助けてあげた。そういう点では例えとして。
Meanwhile, events transpiring a continent away gave Diana new hope for Armenians and Armenia. While the war still raged on, the Bolshevik regime in Russia had withdrawn in order to focus on its own revolution. A peace treaty with the Central Powers cost Russia more than 1 million square miles of its former empire and 1/3 of its population. And in the Caucasus, the Russian retreat created a power vacuum. A tiny new nation, the First Republic of Armenia, declared independence on May 28, 1918. The First Republic of Armenia was impoverished and weak and at war with the Ottoman Empire. It stood alone, occupied by Ottoman troops and overrun by tens of thousands of refugees who had escaped the genocide. It was just a matter of time before this tenuous state dissolved.
By 1918, Ottoman Turkey had lost World War I, and pretty much there was a common sentiment on the European part that there should be restitution for the Armenians for having suffered through a genocide.
On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice, and the Great War was over. Peace negotiations began in Versailles, but only the winning powers participated. Great Britain, France, Italy, and the United States would reshape the world, including the fate of Armenia.
You doubtless have read in the papers the news that the United States will become the guardian of a free Armenia. I am at last seeing the realization of my hopes, and I think I can say that the whole Armenian nation has received this news with great joy and thankfulness. At last, Armenians can live on the soil of Armenia and enter into their own heritage.
For the survivors of the Armenian genocide, the hope was always there that they would go back to their hometowns and villages. They never gave up this hope. Many of them, in fact, did not want to go too far, specifically for this reason. They wanted to stay in the Middle East because they hoped and believed that one day, very soon, they were going to pack up and go back to their ancestral lands.
Diana Apkar shared in these hopes. The initial treaties drafted by the Allied powers envisioned a larger independent Armenia, including territories Armenians had populated in the former Ottoman Empire. The plan: Armenia would be a protectorate of the United States. Diana was a vocal supporter of this vision for her homeland, which was called Wilsonian Armenia.
She argues that the Armenians have fought against the Germans and the Ottomans and deserve the attention, the assistance of the West because of that, and not only because they were victims. This postcard, it's called a summary of what the Armenians have done in the war, essentially makes the appeal not from a position of weakness. She doesn't say the Armenians suffered and have been massacred and killed and you have to help them. It comes from a position of strength. She says the Armenians fought and won so many battles against the Ottomans and the Germans. And it is time now for the West to support and advocate Armenia and Armenians.
The idea that the mandate of the United States holding Armenia as a mandatory power would have changed history, I think it would have, because what it would have meant would be that United States troops would have come to Armenia. Armenians actually were repatriating between 1918 and 1920. So they were coming back. But Armenia was not recognized either as a country till August of 1920.
Diana was so optimistic about Armenia that she began to encourage refugees to resettle there.
16 to 17 women and children are stranded at Vladivostok and are maintained by the Red Cross. In my opinion, not any of these should go to America, even if they were allowed to do so, because what will they do when they get there? Armenia is the best place for these poor people, for somehow they will be able to make a living in their own country. I think these poor people going home will be well looked after.
To reach Armenia from Japan, one had to first sail to the Egyptian city of Port Said.
Some young men have been writing to me and begging of me to send them to Port Said.
I'm guessing that she thought that the best way first would be to reunite these people with their own families, because some of these refugees may have had some relatives somewhere in Armenia, and of course to repopulate Armenia, to help Armenia receive back her children that were dispersed because of the genocide, so they start their life again in their own homeland. And it's very natural to me because of the love and trust that she had for Armenia. As you know, she wrote what she calls a prayer for Armenia and asked all the priests in Armenian churches to have people read this prayer before they set foot in the church, before the church service. That was the level of love and admiration and devotion that she had towards her homeland.
神よ、アルメニアを守りたまえ。神よ、アルメニアを守りたまえ。アルメニアを自由で、純粋のままでいさせ。
Օրհնյա նորա լերթ ու դաշտ, գետ և ծովակ, պարգևյա շնորհ երկնային.
Let Armenia, with heaven's grace, be fruitful and always safe. God, protect Armenia.
ダイアナ・アガベク・アプカー、日本横浜1920年2月1日付。
Փաստը ինքնին հուզիչ է։ Բիրմայում ծնված, Ճապոնիայում բնակված եւ Հայաստանը երբեք չտեսած մի հայուհի գրում է մի բանաստեղծություն աղոթք, հույս ունենալով դրանով մի կերպ հեռվից օգտակար լինել իր մշտատանջ հայրենիքի։
When we got to Yokohama, I went to meet Mrs. Apkar. Among other virtues, she was a philanthropist. She was always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need and solved many of their problems.
You've been through a lot, but it's over now. Armenians are repatriating.
I always wanted to go back to the United States. I believe I will be able to obtain a visa.
His goal was always to get to America because he had been there once before. And, you know, I mean, when you're in a situation like that, you're just thinking about survival day in and day out, and go to a place where you can work and nobody bother you.
A visa will take some time. That means you will have to stay in Japan for several months. Let me see what can be done. Krikl will need work. He's a skilled carpenter. Contact our friends and make a list of projects for him to do.
I have come to say goodbye. Shachnoragalem.
I wish you well, my friend.
The First Republic, you see, is a very interesting period. A lot of Armenians think that it was the realization of Armenian dreams, you know, to have finally an independent state. The only problem is that when Armenians had proclaimed the Republic, the situation was a disaster.
Actually, in that first year, between 1918 and 1919, over a third of Armenia's population died because of disease and hunger, starvation. There was literally no food because people couldn't farm.
Yerevan was a miserable, backward town. Armenia was literally devastated. The Ottoman armies had moved there. The refugee population by the hundreds of thousands. Famine.
Idealistically, you wanted Armenians to go back to rebuild that country, but without the infrastructure there or the support, you're really sending them back to their deaths.
In 1919, May 18th, I hailed the Golden Gate and landed in San Francisco. From thence to Fresno, in my nephew Toros Hampoyan's home, to start a fresh, golden era of reunion with my children. Regretfully, minus my beloved wife, who had died.
Newspapers actually had it wrong. Diana was not the world's first female diplomat. Nonetheless, for years prior to her appointment, Diana Apgar's work was that of a de facto ambassador, saving the lives of her fellow Armenians. The impact of that work was finally being recognized.
Armenians in Armenia knew about Diana. So when the Republic was established and then independence came to Armenia, the letters that were sent to her said, "We are aware of your humanitarian activities and we would like you to represent us in Japan." And these were from Prime Minister Hamo Hanjanyan of the Republic of Armenia. And of course she accepted.
Her appointment as Consul General was very short, actually, not very long, but what she was doing well before she was officially appointed. Actually, she was appointed because of her work.
Armenia's future was debated for 2 years. The Allied powers had envisioned Armenia as an American protectorate. But in the end, the U.S. Senate voted against the mandate, and Diana's dream of an Armenian homeland was dead.
have to stop these people. They are leaving for Armenia, but there is no more Armenia now. I should not have sent them there.
Like, I think, every Armenian, Diana also believed in the future of Armenia, her homeland.
I have bitterly regretted that I sent Armenian refugees to Port Said for repatriation to Armenia.
No one could imagine that the Soviet or Bolshevik takeover would take place, the Republic would fall in 1920, and everything would be lost.
The Republic overall was a miserable affair. On the other hand, it was a fundamental moment in modern Armenian history, because had there not been an Armenian Republic in 1918 to 20, there would not have been an Armenia today.
After the collapse of the Republic and Sovietization of the Republic, she continued her humanitarian work, of course, not on a diplomatic level, but as a service to her people until she managed to help as many refugees as she could to move to the United States.
My dear guests, I am so grateful to have you here with me today. You gave me hope and you gave me purpose. Today we meet to say goodbye to 1920 and celebrate the new year of 1921. Things have been difficult and we've made mistakes, and often the limits of our power were made all too obvious. Our hope for Armenia's independence is all but lost once again. Who is to blame? Will weaker nations ever have a voice? I will not live to see it, but perhaps some of you will. You have gone through more than any human being should experience. You have seen the worst of humanity. I wish the world will never see such atrocities again. And I wish that for all our suffering and all our sacrifices, we will one day have a country again.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. This wonderful woman used to work miracles, helping poor strangers in difficult situations, especially when women and children were involved. She was a woman of faith and prayer, and woman of positive action. She spent all her worldly possessions on the poor.
She's like a fable. Diane Opkar helped my great-grandfather, Krikors. When we're here today, our family has done well for itself, just like many Armenian families who survived the Armenian genocide and started lives again halfway across the world. You know, it's amazing.
She was already acting as a true ambassador. Her entire work, entire life actually, before her appointment and after her appointment, was a true diplomat and a true humanitarian.
There is a lot we don't know about Diana. What we know, I think, is the tip of the iceberg. The extent of her contribution to Armenian people is not fully known and appreciated.
What a wonderful film, Mimi. We thank you very much for a very creative, comprehensive, powerful, and inspiring historical documentary. We all learned a great deal, and how inspirational it was to learn that much about Diana Apgar. We'd like to invite any questions from our audience that you may ask through the Q&A function, and I'll be happy to pass them on to Mimi, who will be answering them for us. I have the first one. Why did you decide to make part of the movie as a cartoon? What made you take this approach for the creation of the film?
Well, the short answer is that there's very little film footage of that period of time. And I literally just have a handful of photographs. Film is a visual medium, and I needed more visual material. But additionally, there were so many stories that nobody knew except me that I needed a way to communicate that. The animation was, it seemed to solve those problems. And this is a very simple animation. It's all done in Photoshop. It's just line drawings that are done on different layers within Photoshop, and then the animator, animates them. So
we have a couple of comments. One is not a question, but I found the visuals and illustrations striking and comprehensive. Beautiful. And another excellent documentary. Thank you for making this film to educate us all about this remarkable woman. And another one says, I can understand why it took 8 years to make. Very true.
Yeah.
We invite more questions from the audience. Cynthia?
Hi, Mimi. That was just a beautiful film. It teared me up several times during the viewing. Sorry, at that one point I bumped my mouse and my screen, the screen reduced there for a second. So I hope that didn't mess it up for anyone. But anyway, I wanted to ask if you could elaborate a little bit more about the research process, and especially, given your relationship to her, and what was it like for you, psychologically, emotionally, making all of these discoveries and putting this together? Was it a cathartic experience? I mean, if you could talk about that a little bit, I'd be really curious.
Okay. I knew growing up, Diana was always respected in the household. I knew her name. When my grandmother would talk about her mother, or my mother talk about her grandmother, there was a reverence in their tone. But I didn't know what that really meant. Nobody provided me with any details. There wasn't, I really didn't have any information to base, just as a reference. I had very little information. And so the research process was long and drawn out. A very large resource was the archives, or several archives at Stanford University at the Hoover Institute, because Diana had a 15-year correspondence with David Starr Jordan, who was one of the founding members of founding president of Stanford University. And so he had her letters that he received all in a file and archived. And occasionally there would be a carbon copy of the letter that he wrote to her. So that was a huge archive. A second one was the American Red Cross archive, also at the Hoover Institute at Stanford. in the American Red Cross in Vladivostok, I should say. And so she had this ongoing correspondence with they were actually military personnel who were running the American Red Cross in Vladivostok. So she had extensive correspondence with them. She was designated as the manager of the Armenian community. So at that camp was a huge camp in Vladivostok, World War I. They had at any one period of time 60,000 refugees. So these were not only Armenians, they were Russians, Lithuanians, on and on and on, people from the entire area. Another very valuable resource was a woman that you may have seen in the film, Melanie Mesropian, a young Armenian woman who traveled to Japan to study linguistics and ended up studying and pursuing her PhD, what became her PhD actually, a study on Diana Apkar. And so she provided me with documents that were in Japan. There was no way that I ever could have found out that information, or that had access to those detailed connections to the Japanese government. So she was a huge resource. And I'd say the fourth main resource was just my own effort of going through ship manifests and US immigration documents to try to develop a list of people. And I created an Excel spreadsheet of people, Armenian refugees who left via Yokohama, and the two main ports they came to were San Francisco and Seattle. They did go to other ports. There was a port in Long Beach and also one in Vancouver, neither of which I've investigated. But so that was another resource. And that was where at the end of the film, the epilogue, I say that she helped 600 people. Those were the names that I was able to identify. But after I completed the film, Melanie Mesropian found an article that had been published in 1920 in Japan, which stated that at that point, she had helped 2,500 people. So since she continued her work through the following decade, of course, that number would have grown. And so that's why now I say she helped thousands of people. So yes, it wasn't a straight linear research process. It was it was circuitous, and there were many discoveries along the way. I would meet people like Christine or Brian or Flora, whose ancestors had traveled through Japan. And that was just kind of by word of mouth or I don't know, just circumstance. And so that was another way of building the story, by reading the memoirs of those who took that journey. So anyway.
We have a question here that intrigues me as well. Could you elaborate on the political debate surrounding the US decision to not create Armenia as a US protectorate? Was it that the US was going back into isolationism and just didn't want any overseas entanglements?
Yes, and it would have been, the US was seen up until that period of time, the US had not really been involved in international affairs or in this, I would actually in this imperialistic wave that went through the 19th century, where Africa was carved up and the Middle East was carved up. You take this country, I'll take that one. The British were in this, wherever, South Africa and Egypt. The French took Syria and Lebanon. I mean, it was kind of a free-for-all after World War I, and how countries were divided and who took a major influence in what country. And the US didn't participate in any of that. So they were not seen as, they were truly seen as an impartial government and party. And so that was really why Wilson's mandate was so highly valued by Diana and other Armenians, because they saw this really as kind of an altruistic gesture. And yeah, it was basically a sense of isolationism, and it's too far away and we would have to send troops, and what are we going to do when we go there, and what is it going to cost, and on and on and on. And the Senate voted against. So.
Thank you. That explains a lot. Do you think that the Armenian genocide should be taught in middle and high school? In what ways can we raise awareness about the Armenian genocide?
I absolutely do think it should be taught. I mean, I would love to share my film with the high schools and students if they're, if there's a venue to do that. So it's, I mean, one of the important lessons, I mean, the Armenian genocide is recognized as the first genocide of the 20th century. And I guess, I mean, there's no question that the Native Americans were, there was this incredible, horrible, dreadful genocide perpetrated against the Native people in this country. But somehow their story has disappeared. But I think all of these stories, whether they're Native American or Armenian or Jewish or Cambodian or, Rwandan, and the list goes on, this sense of a governmental organized slaughter is particularly egregious. And yes, I absolutely think that education is the best way of, resolving problems. I think Germany has done an extraordinary job of educating its younger population about what happened during World War II. And it's, it altered society. That education created a different society. And they're an incredible model, I would say.
Great. One of our audience members says, the animations in your film helped me visualize history and Armenians' experiences in a new way, which I found extremely valuable. My question is, to what extent do Armenians recognize APCAR's efforts?
Well, you know, strangely enough, her name was not all that well recognized. And the main reason was that the Soviet government did not recognize the what was the political party at the time that ran the leaders of the First Republic, the Tashnak Party. And so that whole part of Armenia's history was, well, subjugated or ignored or just, yeah, not a part of regular schooling in Soviet Armenia. So there was, I mean, people who studied the First Republic may have recognized her name, but there was very little, I would say very little recognition. When my film came out, it you know, just doing the film kind of brought things, several things seemed to happen simultaneously. The film came out when I completed literally the month I finished the film, Melanie completed her PhD. And she made the comment to me that she made that observation to me, you know, at which point I said, I feel like I've completed my own PhD.
You did.
But so, and then other things seem to happen along with that, just, yeah. So the film showed in 2019 at the Golden Apricot Film Festival in Yerevan. And yes, Diana has been recognized more and more. Just today, I received, I'll share an image if I can, or I'm not sure if it will, what will happen here, but a stamp has just been printed. And it's a Diana Apkar stamp. And I received this in the mail today. So, you know, things are still happening. Her name is still out there and recognition is growing.
Very good. So, Mimi, what you're saying about the education, even in Armenia, when it was part of the Soviet Empire, so from 1920 to 1991, it wasn't even taught in Armenian schools.
That's right.
Astounding, just tragic. How was she able to get introductions to influential people? Was it through their counterparts located in Japan?
No, she was very forward. She was very bold. I mean, I might even say brazen. She would decide that she would read an article, let's say, by someone or a reference of someone and think, I need to be in touch with that person. She would write a letter, dear sir. She would include a copy of one of her books, and she would say, forgive me for writing to you without an introduction. I would like to share my book with you. And then from there, she would go forward with her pleas, her concerns, you know, just what can you do, and just raise awareness. So yeah, she would just find people through newspapers, people who were referenced to her, and she would just take a very bold step and try to initiate a conversation however she could.
What happened to the people on the boats who went to Armenia when it was invaded?
So like Christine was saying, her great uncle Hachik went to Port Said. So by the ship, they went from Yokohama to Egypt. So what happened to many of them is that they in fact did not go from Egypt across the Mediterranean to Armenia, but in fact were they either met with relatives who said, you can't go there, it's a disaster, things are falling apart. And so then many found a way to come to the US from Egypt to the East Coast. So they circumvented the world in kind of two directions. I would expect some actually made it to Anatolia, but yeah, things were not good. So I really can't answer that. I have met two people whose relatives, like Christine, I met someone else whose relative had gone to Port Said, and he also then traveled to the East Coast of the US from there. So.
How did you meet the relatives of the genocide survivors?
This was, I don't know, it was just good fortune is all I can say. Or yeah, somehow it was just miraculous. I don't know. It's not that I knew them or that I knew how to reach them or I knew that they even existed, and things would just kind of happen. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Oh, this film was meant to be made.
Yeah.
Mimi, would you remind us how you are related to Apgar?
So she is my great grandmother on all maternal sides. So my mother's mother's mother.
I see. Well, Mimi, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful film with us. One audience member asks how this might be accessible for viewing again.
I have DVDs if anybody's interested. I have a website, which is dianaapcar.org. If anyone's interested in more information about her, it's dianaapcar.org. You can buy a DVD through the website. I'm always interested in sharing the film wherever I can. So if someone has a venue or where they want to screen it, you know, I'm always open to screenings, virtual or otherwise. I hope it will be streaming at some point. I haven't been able to coordinate that yet, but
it's coming.
Yeah, I hope so.
Mimi, thank you so much. This is a very special evening, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity to see your film. We wish you the best with it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
my Uncle Kachik, Mimi.
Yeah, okay.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, it has.